Thank you very much. So as you've heard, I'm Stephen Gough. I'm the Chief Medical Officer for Novo Nordisk, based in Copenhagen. And what I'd like to do is just say something about novel therapies, and obviously novel therapies that Novo Nordisk are developing, how they're actually increasing our understanding of disease. But at the same time, I think we have to be mindful that they're going to and are leading to changes in drug development. And I think a lot of this ties in quite nicely with a lot of what I've heard over the last 24 hours or so. Well, that was fast. That was just my disclosure slide. So, for those of you that don't know me, for those of you that are unfamiliar with GLP-1, this is an incretin hormone or peptide hormone that's released from the gut wall when you have something to eat. And it stimulates insulin and therefore regulates your glucose. So when you go and have your lunch in an hour or so, as that food goes into the gastrointestinal tract, it will stimulate GLP-1, and that's the messenger, if you like, by which you will then maintain your blood glucose levels, because it stimulates insulin secretion. It does so in a glucose-dependent manner. But this peptide only survives in the circulation for around 2 minutes. We know that in people with type 2 diabetes, some people have reduced incretin hormones and reduced GLP-1. And we also know from a pharmacological point of view, we can use this in type 2 diabetes to improve blood glucose control. And at Novo Nordisk, what we have done is we've taken the GLP-1 molecule and developed two analogues. The first, liraglutide, which is now approved as a once-daily subcutaneous injection for the treatment of type 2 diabetes. And more recently, in the last 2 years, semaglutide, which is a stronger, more powerful agent that can be taken once weekly as a subcutaneous injection. And actually, in the last 3 weeks, we've just had approved oral semaglutide, which is now a once-daily tablet. And I think this is the first time a peptide has been developed that can be given orally. And once semaglutide gets into the circulation, it doesn't matter how it gets there, it has exactly the same effect whether you take it as a tablet or you take it as an injection. So we've developed these, obviously as glucose-lowering agents, anticipating additional benefits, including benefits in terms of weight. And what we saw, and this is consistent with others in the field, that there are other companies developing GLP-1 receptor agonists and have done similar trials to this. What we saw at the end of our liraglutide development program with the LEADER trial and at the end of the semaglutide development program with SUSTAIN-6 was a cardiovascular benefit. With this drug, these drugs, we could reduce cardiovascular events. We could reduce cardiovascular death, non-fatal MI, and non-fatal stroke as a primary endpoint. And I think this, along with others in the class, really changed how we view diabetes and how we view diabetes treatment. And we've seen similar but different effects with, for example, the SGLT2 inhibitors. What this means is that these medicines have changed clinical guidelines. And if you look now, whether you look at diabetes guidelines or you look at cardiology guidelines, these drugs are now recommended as the go-to drugs, the medicines for type 2 diabetes if you have cardiovascular disease. Now, in addition, in these trials, there appears to be a renal benefit in terms of the progressive nature of diabetic kidney disease. At the moment, we don't have the full answers for GLP-1 receptor agonists. We're currently conducting a 5-year renal outcomes trial, the FLOW trial, so we'll have some answers, but it will take a number of years to get there. So we have these additional benefits. Now, the other thing that we noticed with the liraglutide, and this is where we had a 3-year trial in over 2,000 patients, was the beneficial effect on weight could also be translated into delaying the onset of type 2 diabetes. And again, I think this is highly relevant to the discussions we've been having. So you can see that with liraglutide at a higher dose of 3 milligrams, we had a weight loss of over 6% with liraglutide compared to just under 2% with placebo. But importantly, the rate of developing type 2 diabetes was significantly reduced whilst on drug. 3% in the liraglutide arm compared to 11% in placebo. So whilst you're on drug, we have the potential to delay the onset of type 2 diabetes, almost certainly through weight beneficial effects. So you can see that there's an accumulating evidence for GLP-1 having a multitude of effects. And then, in the last few years, we've also seen that GLP-1 receptor agonists may also have a benefit in NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, which was referred to yesterday in the type 2 diabetes session. And this study, which actually I conducted before joining Novo Nordisk, actually showed that liraglutide could improve hepatocytes. It could improve the appearance of hepatocytes, reduction in steatosis, reduction in fibrosis, and maybe could really have an impact in terms of liver outcomes. So based on this and other data as well, we're currently conducting a phase 2 trial with semaglutide, which will report out next year. This is liver biopsy, beginning and end, looking at the impact of semaglutide on NASH. So you can see that the diseases that are now being covered by GLP-1 seem to be extending. And the last example I'd like to give, and unfortunately the brain is not moving round, and it would do, on this slide. We know that GLP-1 receptor agonists are widely expressed in the brain, and that GLP-1 is involved in cognition. On the left-hand side of the slide, you can see GLP-1 receptor expression in the mouse brain. We know that GLP-1 is a neurotransmitter. We know it's involved in cognition. We know this from mouse studies. And you can also see on the right-hand side of this slide, in an animal model with a tau mutation, that these tau tangles can be prevented with liraglutide in the mouse model. And you can see here in the forebrain, in the hindbrain, and also the cerebellum. So we have a potential here to do something about malcognitive impairment and maybe Alzheimer's. And this is certainly something that we're looking into, and there are currently ongoing investigator-initiated trials. So I would just sort of wrap up by saying that GLP-1 for us is, if you like, our entry into metabesity. I'm not saying GLP-1 is the cause of metabesity, but what I can say is that GLP-1 is certainly, from a pharmacological point of view, has the potential to have a major impact on all of these diseases. And really, my final slide, and if you want a discussion point, this is my discussion point, is that I think with type 2 diabetes now, the bar is raised. We're moving beyond glycemia and we're moving beyond weight. We're probably moving beyond cardiovascular disease and renal disease. And certainly from a Novo Nordisk point of view, we have a very active R&D department in diabetes. We won't be looking at anything that's not as good as semaglutide. But what this is making us do is rethink how we do our clinical trials and how we develop these drugs. Because for everything I've talked about, there's a big phase 3 program. We've looked at over 50,000 patients to get to where we are. And we're going to need to look at a similar number of patients if we want to really develop new indications for known drugs. Will this come from RCTs? Will it come from real-world evidence? What about public-private partnerships? I mention this because there is an opportunity here and things are happening. But obviously, we also need it to expand into new patient populations. So a big discussion point from my point of view. Thank you.